breaking news from RTV6.
Breaking news right now on HDSN and the RTV6 app. Right now, Republican lawmakers look to clarify the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which Governor Mike Pence signed last week. Let's listen in to David Long, the Senator Pro Tem.
In the history of this law, has it ever been allowed to discriminate against anyone? This new law in Indiana, the same one that 30 other states have, does not discriminate against anyone. And it is not the intent of the law to discriminate against anyone, and it will not be allowed to discriminate against anyone. And to the extent that we need to clarify through legislative action that this law does not and will not be allowed to discriminate against anyone, we plan to do just that. I'd like the Speaker to have his comments, and then we have to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Senator Long. One of the primary reasons that Senator Long and I decided to make a public statement this morning is because there were questions asked this weekend about whether the Senate Bill 101 was designed, had the intent, or would have the effect of discriminating against gay and lesbian Hoosiers. The answer is no. That's not the intent or the design of the bill. The answer is no. It's not the effect of the bill. And what Senator Long and I are here today to state is, to the extent that that might be the effect of the bill, we're prepared to encourage our legislative colleagues to take immediate action to clarify that in every way. What we had hoped for with the bill was a message of inclusion of all religious beliefs. What instead has come out is a message of exclusion, and that was not the intent and hopefully not the effect, but to the extent it is, we're intent on writing that. With that, we'll be happy to take your questions.
Mr. Speaker, is it
what will legislation be that you're proposing?
Yeah, I think our biggest concern is the prospect that has been raised both by the opponents and some of the proponents of the bill now, that services may be denied to an individual based on their sexual orientation. We don't believe that's the effect. It hasn't been the impact anywhere else in the nation that's had a RFRA standard, but we are looking at options to clarify that that's the case.
Mr. Speaker, do those options include either A statewide human rights ordinance, or B, something that's been suggested, perhaps, not allowing RFRA to be used as a defense against any state, local, or federal human rights ordinance?
Yeah, I think we have to look at all options. The removal of the specter of the RFRA being a defense to a claim that services were denied may be one approach, and one approach we're looking at.
Well, I think the point being, though, on this, we don't believe that anyone should be discriminated against. We wouldn't have supported this law if we thought that was the effect of it. To the extent that we need to clarify that by adding something to the law to make that clear that's not the intent of the law, we're more than willing to do it, and we plan to do that. But again, we don't support discrimination against anyone, and that law doesn't do that, and it never has done that in the past. And I think, unfortunately, it's been misconstrued, perhaps misrepresented, intentionally, unintentionally. I won't even begin to suggest that. But it's very important that people understand that's not the intent of the law. There's no history of it being used that way, and it won't be allowed to be used in Indiana that way either.
When was the first time where you guys began to look at each other and think, okay, something is wrong with this bill? Just the way it's being perceived or whatever.
Yeah.
When did you first realize something was wrong?
Well, I don't know that we've ever considered something to be wrong with the bill. The characterization of the bill and the interpretation of the effect of the bill, we started having our discussions on Friday intently after we heard from a lot of folks on Thursday. A lot of those concerns had not been raised, at least very vocally, before. And, if it's going to have real impact or potential impact based on the mischaracterization of the bill on both sides, we determined we needed to clarify.
The governor said pretty clearly that the governor said pretty clearly yesterday that there would be no change to this law. What's your message to the governor right now?
Well, I'm not certain the governor did say that yesterday, but you're looking at the individuals that govern the two chambers that adopt legislation, and what we're stating today is we're going to encourage our colleagues to adopt a clarifying measure of some sort to remove this misconception about the bill.
Were there not amendments?
We'll get to everybody. Okay, we'll get to everyone.
Yes, you had a question? Yeah.
Is the fact that you're considering this legislation that could clarify the law just 4 days after it was enacted a sign that you're buckling to public pressure.
No, I think I wouldn't say those words. I think we're reacting to an obvious misconception about what the law does, and that's something we feel strongly we need to do at this point. I don't think we've ever seen a reaction like this to the laws passed historically in the other states or when the federal government did it. But clearly, people are reacting differently to this law. We didn't see that coming, and we need to clarify to everyone this law will not be allowed to discriminate against anyone. And so that clarifying language should, we hope, put that to rest, but we'll get to work on that immediately. We already are working on it, and we hope we have a fix soon. We do, under our rules, have to talk to each of our caucuses, because this is not a dictatorship in either of our houses, our chambers. And so we'll have to do that, but we hope to have a fix very soon.
Will that language give have specific exemptions under which?
No, I think what we're looking at right now is specific clarity to remove the misconception that RFRA allows the denial of services to any Hoosier. It doesn't do that. There are those who say, on both sides now, who say it has the potential to do that. Some that says it absolutely does do that. It's our intent to clarify that it does not.
Do you feel pressure to do this before the final?
No, I think we feel the need to step up to the plate today and get this clarified and calm the seas here and make sure people understand what this law does not do.
Yeah, Jim, there's unsettled waters right now, right? And that could have far-ranging impact. We determined we needed to step in and be sure that those waters are calmed, that the misconceptions about the bill are settled, and if that requires a legislative clarification, that's what we're working on.
How quickly can we do this?
Quickly.
Meaning today?
No, I don't.
We've got some work to do. We've got to talk to our caucuses, our leadership team. We've got to consult with the governor as well, and be sure that we're all moving in the same direction legislatively.
The legislative process has some deliberation to it, obviously, and so we have to get something that can pass both chambers. We'll expedite whatever we come up with to make sure that it's done rapidly, but obviously we have to get consensus on the language. We're getting closer to that. We have to talk to our caucuses, the governor's office, but we're comfortable that we can get something put into place that hopefully will calm the seas and let people know what this law does not do.
Did you?
One of the things the governor mentioned was, there's 19 other states around the country that have a similar law. What is it about this law that makes it different from the other states?
It really is not. There's actually 30 other states that have this same judicial review standard. So it's virtually identical to all. A few have pointed to the fact that it applies to corporations in addition to as a person. That's the federal law. Some of the states don't have that, but this is absolutely on a level playing field with the 30 other states. So it's mischaracterization and misperception about the bill.
Will you be looking at the language of both the other states and the federal law as you draft and you work?
Well, we already did. In fact, this law follows the federal law, and that's what the Supreme Court said. When they upheld this law in 1997, they said, well, in their ruling then, it said it could only apply to federal law, but if the states wanted to pass similar language, it would be constitutional, which is why 31 states now have done something like that.
But would you support changing the state's human rights law to include gays and lesbians, which the governor said he would not?
Yeah, that's a big policy step. There's only, of the 30 states that have a RFRA standard, 10 of those have done that. And the big policy discussion here to toss in the middle of 4 weeks before the end of a session.
It seems like that is the major issue, though, for a lot of people opposed to
it. It has been made the issue. Again, as we're trying to state here today, this law doesn't cause that kind of discrimination. We're going to put a legislative language into the bills. Our intent is to make sure nobody misunderstands what the bill does. To the extent that that would be something we need to look at in Indiana, I think we're willing to do that.
So without this clarification, would a business be able to discriminate?
No.
They can't discriminate today under the way the bill has been passed. It's been stated that they can by both the opponents and the proponents.
Well, some proponents.
Right. And we want to clarify that that was not the intent, was never the intent, and it's not going to be the effect of the law. And we're willing to add some clarity legislatively.
Both of you,
Nikki, what'd you say?
both of you now mentioned that are acknowledging now that the proponents are also saying it means they can deny service.
Some proponents.
They've been saying that since December when this all started. So why is it that you guys sort of just caught on that that's what they want out of it?
Let me clarify that. I think a small tribe of people are suggesting that it does that. They're mistaken, and to the extent they're saying that, I disagree with their interpretation of it. But you can't stop people from saying what they want to say, which is why we're in the situation we're in right now, which is that people are misunderstanding and misconstruing this law. You can't say that enough, obviously. The fact is, it doesn't do that. It doesn't discriminate, and anyone on either side of this issue suggests otherwise. It's just plain flat wrong.
And frankly, we've been listening to the legal experts who have, some of whom support gay marriage, some who don't, who have called for this change to bring clarity to Indiana law. That's who we've been talking to, not the folks that are on the polar opposite sides of the issue.
The gentleman in the gray jacket.
Democratic leaders are going to call for a repeal in a few minutes. Is that out of the question?
Do you know that? They haven't told us that.
They said the reason is that they want to call for a repeal of Senate Bill 101.
Yeah, I find that unlikely. I think that clarification of the clear misconception of the bill is the least intrusive surgical action that we can take here, and that should remove the question that has many Hoosiers and folks all over the country concerned, and that is a gay or lesbian individual going to be denied services when they go to a restaurant or when they take their dry cleaning in? That was never the intent. It's not the effect, but we're willing to clarify that statutorily.
Let me say something also on this. Religious freedom and the right to be free from discrimination can coexist together. They have for many years in this country, and that's what we should all strive for. And that's what the goal of this bill is, and it's not to discriminate. I think if you look at the court rulings, you'll find that at any time, like the Hobby Lobby case, where they ruled for the company, they said their religious rights have been discriminated against, they only did so because the employees' rights were also taken care of. And they did that balancing act. We can't control what the courts will or won't say, except we know what they have said in the past, and we know that they have never allowed anyone to be discriminated against because of this law, and we're very confident that will be the case in Indiana as well.
So
right here.
To find that language that you just talked about that will do that will also pass both chambers and be signed by the governor, what does that language look like?
Well, we're working on that right now, and again, we've been in consultation. We've been in consultation with some of our leadership team, but we have there are 150 legislators here that have to be brought in on the discussion. So we've got some work to do on that.
Have you discussed this with the governor himself?
Mr. Speaker, back in the back throughout all this, the companies like Cummins and Lilly have raised concerns about this would be perceived as unwelcoming. The Indianapolis Chamber did that during the hearings. Why do you think that you're surprised that this has been?
Yeah, I think I'm surprised at the statement of fact, in quote, that is made that this allows the denial of service to any segment of the Hoosier community. It does not, and those who say that are wrong. What we're saying today is to put an exclamation point on that. If we need to put some additional language in there to clarify that, that is our goal, because it was never our intent to do so, and I don't think it's the effect of the bill as it stands now, but there are folks who do.
Bill Bianco?
Do you think there's anything that you could have done earlier in the session that's not had this national backlash? I think there's a lot of misunderstanding.
Well, it's a good question, but the fact is we've never seen this when it was passed anywhere else. And to anticipate that this would create that problem when we know the way the law has been construed in the past, it doesn't allow for discrimination. For people to suddenly come out and say, oh, this discriminates, it's just not true. There's no fact based in that claim. So it would have been impossible for us to anticipate that. But now that it's being said so broadly, it's important for us to react to that, to make sure that it's not the case, so that people are comfortable understanding this law does not discriminate and will not be allowed to do so.
What happened
in Arizona last year? I mean, didn't they give you guys some sense of what could happen here?
I think their version, they already had the RFRA standard. What they were looking to do is expand it quite a bit into uncharted territory. So I don't think it's an apt comparison. All this does, and I know if you've just read a media report or you're getting most of your information off of Twitter, You might think this is a bill that specifically allows discrimination against a category. What it does is it sets a standard of review for a court when issues of religious freedom and other rights collide due to government action. Okay, that's a long legal. I'd encourage you, if you want some resource material, the Indiana House Republicans have a resource page that has the bill. It has some legal commentary on the bill and some articles that are written that are quite factual.
Arizona did get quite a bit of pushback from the LGBT community when this bill was passed and then vetoed by the governor. Did you consult with LGBT groups while, crafting the language of this bill to make sure that it was inclusive?
No. The reason we didn't is because this law doesn't discriminate against anyone, and if we thought it did, we would have dealt with that. We don't believe it does. In fact, we know it doesn't based on the historic legal interpretation of these laws. We followed the federal law in crafting this bill. So whatever Arizona did or didn't do is not what we did. We were very careful to follow the federal law, knowing that that would be interpreted as constitutional, assuming that it wouldn't cause any problems, because the history of this bill shows it doesn't allow discrimination. It simply reinforces, by creating the three-tier standard that's the law in all federal courts and in 31 states, that protects religious liberty. That's what this is about, not about discrimination. And so we had no way to anticipate people would interpret it that way.
Given the existence of the federal law, then why did Indiana feel compelled to pass it?
Because the courts have said that the federal law does not apply to state action. So it was only after the Hobby Lobby case last year that legal scholars took a look at Indiana's law and said, hey, just so you all know, your case law does not follow the majority of the rest of the country. Here's the solution, and that's what we worked with. And those legal scholars, whose treatise is posted on our website, stated right in there, they're from Harvard, Princeton, Stanford, Indiana University, Notre Dame, respected constitutional law experts, some of whom said right in their letter, half of us support or most of us support gay marriage, some of us do not. But this standard is the proper standard for review by courts.
How do you fix the backlash against the state, quite frankly? Other governors saying we're not going to go to Indiana?
By telling the truth. And that's what we're doing here today, that this does not discriminate. And by inserting into the law, to the extent we can do this properly, the state, legal language showing that it won't be allowed to discriminate. But remember, this does not discriminate against anyone. Just because people say that doesn't make it so. And if you dig into the facts and into the history of this law, you'll recognize that's not happening. And it won't happen in Indiana either. Unfortunately, people are saying things that aren't true, are suggesting things that the bill does that it really doesn't. And all we can do is try to straighten that out with our actions legislatively, and by asking people to look at the facts, study the facts, and understand this law does not discriminate.
Hopefully this is the first step in that to answer the question of whether this is intended or has the effect to discriminate. The answer is no. And to the extent that it is suggested that that is the effect, we're ready to take action.
We apologize for this sound. I don't know.
I'm thinking it's right back here.
Could be.
No?
Okay.
Okay.
Well, our guys are trying to fix that.
Feedback from someone's mic. I'm sorry, it's
Yeah.
not the Senate.
It's okay.
So, Eric?
There were Democratic amendments in both the House and the Senate that purported to be the kind of clarification you're talking about. Are there problems with those amendments, or is that a template going forward?
Yeah, we were concerned about those amendments, quite frankly, because there's so much case law under this statute around the country that to make Indiana's statute different, substantially different through those amendments, gave us concern that it was not predictable. The goal here was to have a predictable decision review standard for the courts, and adding that language made us different, would have made us different than every other state in the union and the federal law, which we were concerned about.
But it looks like now you're going to have to be different anyway.
Well, I think that we're going to have to be different in a slight way, in a subtle way, which is to clarify what the law is not allowed to be used for. And it means no one can be denied services or be discriminated against in this state, period, no matter who you are.
So on that point, if a business owner opposes gay marriage because of their religious beliefs and they're asked to provide a service to a gay wedding, will they have the potential of being protected under this law?
It depends on that's the difference of opinion right now as to whether they do or don't, and that's what we intend to clarify in the work that we're doing now.
When you clarify the legislation, will such a business owner?
Well, ultimately, that's going to be the courts that decide that, but my answer would be no. I don't believe you can discriminate against anyone based on their sexual preference or for any other reason whatsoever.
Can't you already?
Mr. Speaker, as part of the fact that you gentlemen are here today is because of the governor's performance on George Stephanopoulos this week.
I think that the fact that he did not answer some questions clearly, yes.
Now, I'll say this too, for the record. Last week, the governor, when he signed the bill, said, I don't believe this discriminates against anyone, and if it did, I wouldn't have signed the bill. It would have been helpful if he'd said that yesterday to clarify where he stands. But the fact that he didn't, for whatever reason, we're setting the record straight here today.
I think it raised the specter that that was the intent or the effect, and that's one of the reasons we're standing here today, is to resolve that.
You guys have said repeatedly that we shouldn't be able to discriminate against anyone, but if you just ignore the existence of this law, can't we already do that now? Can't so-and-so in Richmond put a sign up and say, no gays allowed? That's not against the law, correct?
It would depend on if you were in a community that had a human rights ordinance, that wouldn't be the case.
But most of the state does not have this, correct?
That's correct.
At this point, have there been any business owners who you've talked to who have voiced concerns, who after you have talked to them have said, okay, I am no longer concerned?
I can answer that. I have talked to several who said, in both cases, they did take the time to read the law. And while they didn't believe this created the controversy that people were suggesting, they also said it would be most helpful if you could clarify that somehow and take some action to make it clear to everyone that it's not what's going on here in Indiana, because they're worried about the perception of our state, as we are. I think it's terribly unfair what's being said about our state. It's a great great people. We don't support discrimination against anyone in this state, but unfortunately some people are suggesting that for whatever reason. So this fix has meaning for that reason as well, and hopefully by doing this we'll put this whole issue to rest.
Well, the fix, Mr. Speaker and Senator Long, I think some are worried about the timing issue about this. When these laws were passed in a lot of states, they were passed bipartisanly with overwhelming support. Today is a different case. Why did Indiana wait so long for something that's supposedly needed and benign?
Yeah, really, it hadn't been an issue until the legal scholars, after the Hobby Lobby case, said, hold it, just so you know, Indiana is an outlier in your case law. You're on your own standard. It's totally unpredictable. We cannot tell you what will happen if issues of religious freedom, as they intersect with other rights, when they conflict, we cannot tell you what the result will be because the case law is unclear. And they were the ones that brought forward the measure to us and said, and the folks that were the sponsors and authors, and said, look, we need to clarify this.
There are some that have said that you're picking and choosing which legal scholars you're listening to. A Columbia law professor wrote a very different letter to the one that you mentioned before, claiming that this bill is discriminatory, and it was signed by 30 law professors from around the country.
Well, I would ask that professor provide proof, because when you look at the facts, it's not the case. They may suggest that people's intent was to do it, but the law has never been allowed to discriminate, and it won't be allowed to discriminate here in Indiana either. And so I would challenge anyone who suggests otherwise, just based on what all legal scholars normally use and what the legal scholars we've talked to suggest, which is case law says it won't be allowed to discriminate. But their support for this, many of whom support same-sex marriage, is that it is a much stronger standard for protecting religious liberty, and that was their focus, not on sexual preference or anything else. And on that basis, that's why we put this law into place. It's a stronger statement about religious liberty than what we had on our books before, but it is not intended to discriminate against anyone. And as I said before, religious liberty and discrimination in opposition to discrimination can both coexist.
How long do you think it'll take to correct this perception of Indiana?
Well, it depends in part on the folks gathered in this room. If the message is transmitted that the bill was never intended for this, it didn't have the effect of denying any individual's service, as is the reality, then perhaps that tide can be changed. That's one of the reasons we're standing here today.
You guys said that even after this clarifying language, that ultimately it will be up to a judge to decide whether a business owner who refuses to provide services for a gay wedding is allowed to do that or not, to say it's going to be up to a judge, it still seems unclear. So,
Well, Tony, it's always the case where any law we pass ultimately is going to be decided upon in the courts if the lawsuit's brought based on that law. That's the way our country works, our system of government and legal structure works. So that's the only reason we're bringing that up. You use the history of those decisions to help guide you in knowing how it's interpreted. And we have a long history here that's told us it's never been allowed to discriminate against anyone, and it won't be in Indiana either.
And that's true with or without RFRA, Tony. All we know with RFRA is what standard the judge will apply. Without it, it's very unclear in Indiana, so say the legal scholars.
We only have time for a couple more questions.
Have you given a vehicle yet?
Have a what?
Have you picked out a vehicle? What bills is?
I really like the Jeep Grand Cherokee. No, we haven't yet. We're looking.
You say there's a misconception having to do with this bill. Do you think that has anything to do with the fact that it came so close on the heels of the gay marriage ban?
Perhaps that added to the misperception of it. It really had nothing to do with it. It more closely affiliated with the Hobby Lobby case than anything else, at least for us. Now, what other folks on the opposing sides had in mind, we don't speak for them. We're speaking for what our legislative leadership teams intended.
I don't understand how you didn't see that coming, though, when there was so much animosity towards the gay marriage ban, and then this comes right after it. How did you? And you say you're surprised by the reaction.
I think because there's no intent there to discriminate, and I guess we expect people to take the time to study the law and to understand that. Obviously, that didn't happen. So we're here today trying to set the record straight and saying that the extent we need to put additional language into this law, we're willing to do that.
So I think, if I can go, and then Brandon, to add to that, I don't think anyone anticipated that the characterization of the bill would be this denies services to a specific class of Hoosiers. It does just the opposite. It includes all Hoosiers in the religious freedom standard, and it's a misperception that it denies services. Now, having said that, if that's what gets tweeted and that's what gets retweeted, it's short, it's understandable, and it picked up steam. It's not the effect, but it's the perception.
Given the perception, given the backlash, wouldn't it be better to turn the tide by including sexual orientation as a protected class in state law, or at least debating that?
Yeah, and we said earlier, every option should be on the table. We have 4 weeks left in this legislative session, and to inject that right now, I think that's an uphill battle to try to get that very controversial issue, which has only been successful in a minority of states, to get that resolved here in short order.
Is that something that India can look at and study and see the effects of that in other states? Yes, it's something we can take a look at. But you don't rush that monumental decision, which is apples and oranges, by the way. It has nothing to do with RFRA, except that people say it does. But can we take a look at that? Certainly we can. But it requires deliberation. It requires a serious study of it to see if that makes sense for this state. And that's how you need to approach every issue of that substance.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
I appreciate it. Media requests, we will fulfill them throughout the day. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
You have just heard from the Republican leaders in the Indiana State Legislature, Senate Pro Tem David Long and House Speaker Brian Bosma. They're calling for their colleagues to work on a clarification to the Religious Freedom Act to make it clear that it does not condone discrimination against gay and lesbian Hoosiers. The Republican lawmakers say they want to make that clear and they want to squash any misconceptions. We're going to have more in-depth coverage here on the Democratic response on HTSN and on our mobile app and the news at noon on RTV6. This has been live breaking news coverage. Thank you for joining us on HTSN and the RTV6 app.